The reason we investigate context is to understand how it has shaped meaning in a text. In other words, how events and issues in the composer's world have influenced their work. This includes the composer's personal life, the broader social conditions at the time, cultural movements, and political manoeuvres. Being able to make meaningful comments about the context of a text in an extended critical response is a real skill, especially in an exam situation. It lifts the quality of your response, adds depth to your analysis, and helps you access a higher range of marks. So let's get cracking. Although it was never confirmed by Orwell, some critics have argued that the title, 1984, is simply a rearrangement of the number 1948, a year in which Orwell was busy finishing the novel. Using this interpretation, we can already see a strong connection between the real issues and events in Orwell's compositional context and the human experiences he represents in the novel. 1984 was first published in 1949, but the concept for the novel really developed during Orwell's stint in the Spanish Civil War in 1936. Long story short, Orwell, a young British man, was so opposed to totalitarianism in all its forms that he volunteered to fight against fascism in Spain. Remember, totalitarianism is an extreme form of governance where citizens have to be completely obedient to a dictator and the government, while fascism is a particularly bad form of totalitarianism that enforces strict social and economic order. Orwell fought bravely in the war, but was shot in the throat and barely escaped with his life. Now that's commitment to a cause. As a result of his personal experiences, Orwell became a lifelong advocate for democratic socialism. This is a political ideology that supports free debate and elections within a decentralised, socially owned economy. Orwell's commitment to social democracy and fighting fascism influenced many of his works. One of these works was an essay Orwell published in 1946 titled The Prevention of Literature. In this essay, Orwell explains how totalitarianism results when the ruling class loses its function but clings to power by force or fraud. Orwell wrote 1984 to reify this idea. Reification is when you convert an abstract idea into a more concrete example to make it easier to understand. In the novel Big Brother and The Party are modelled on this fraudulent and forcefully oppressive power structure. We'll touch on Big Brother and The Party a bit later in the video. Now let's take a closer look at some major historical events that shaped 1984. 1984 was Orwell's final warning to a society that was traumatised by 2 world wars and the horror of the atomic bomb. After World War II ended in 1945, hope for peace quickly faded as the world's superpowers, mainly the Soviet Union and the USA, began to jostle for global influence. They also started a nuclear arms race that basically terrified the entire world. The threat of nuclear apocalypse remained a day-to-day menace for everyone due to the doctrine or principle of mutually assured destruction, or MAD. What an appropriate acronym, hint hint. According to this principle, full-scale nuclear war results in the annihilation of both the defending and attacking countries. Yikes! So all of this was happening in the background while Orwell was furiously trying to finish his manuscript for 1984. He cleverly mirrored the constant tension between the world's superpowers through the fictional superstates of Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia. These superstates represent Orwell's vision of the future. They are the final result of the continuous rise of nuclear-armed, totalitarian governments throughout the world. Orwell predicted that this cycle would continue until at least one of these governments finally perfected its system of absolute power. That would be the day when tyranny finally wins out and all hope is lost, forever. No individuality, no freedom of speech or thought, no literature, no love, no thanks. So after witnessing the rise of brutal totalitarian governments in Europe and the devastating impact of World War II, George Orwell dedicated his life to dismantling these ideologies. In fact, he had such faith in the power of literature to alter the course of history that he ploughed on with the manuscript for 1984 while dying of tuberculosis, cooped up in a drafty old farmhouse on a random Scottish island. Brrr. That's why 1984 is known as the masterpiece that killed George Orwell. Literally. On the 21st of January 1950, at the age of 46 and only 6 months after the publication of 1984, Orwell died after an artery burst in his lungs. How disappointing that he never got to enjoy the huge success of this novel. But how can a fictional novel be a warning to us in the real world? Well, Orwell analysed the major geopolitical events occurring in the 1930s and 40s and brought them to a horrifying yet plausible conclusion. 1984 is a speculative fiction novel, meaning that it is set in a future world, in this case England or Airstrip 1 in 1984. The setting of this future world is dystopian, meaning that the populace are oppressed and suffer terrible injustices. The immortal, tyrannical government that controls everything in this dystopian version of England is known as the Party. The Party is founded on oligarchical collectivism. An oligarchy is where a small group of powerful people have control of a country. Orwell coined the phrase oligarchical collectivism to describe the totalitarian ideology of English socialism in 1984. Now, there are also some real people who inspired Orwell, but not in a good way. In the novel, the Party is led by the disembodied, black mustachioed dictator, Big Brother, who is more of a concept than a real person. Orwell obviously combined elements of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich and Joseph Stalin's Communist Soviet Union when creating the world of 1984. In particular, the motif, or recurring symbol, of Big Brother's face on walls, screens and buildings throughout the novel is an allusion or reference to the widespread use of highly stylised images of Stalin in Soviet propaganda posters. This led to a culture of leader worship in the Soviet Union, despite the fact that Stalin was responsible for the deaths of millions due to famine, forced labour, torture, and mass executions. This is mirrored in the novel in the way party members worship Big Brother, extending their arms towards his image and rhythmically chanting "B" during the 2 minutes hate. But by now you're probably thinking, 1984 has been and gone, and I don't have a totalitarian boot stamping on my face. This Orwell guy got it wrong. Well, maybe things aren't as extreme as Orwell envisaged in the novel, but there are still some frighteningly Orwellian aspects of the society we live in. Ever thought about how a small group of people in Silicon Valley hold absolute power over everything we see, hear and express online? What about the way social media companies can monitor users 24/7, deleting posts and banishing users without giving any right to appeal? or the way smartphones have basically taken on the role of telescreens. Then there are governments who spend a fortune on technologies and vast armies of personnel whose job it is to maintain surveillance on citizens. Creepy much. Even Orwell's neologisms, or words that he invented like Big Brother, thought police, doublethink and newspeak, are still part of our lexicon or vocabulary over 70 years after 1984 was published. In other words, 1984 is such a compelling and prophetic narrative that Orwell's made-up words have been absorbed into our everyday language and general understanding of the world we live in. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons on 1984, check out our analysis of the theme of surveillance.